Greetings, everyone. This is Professor Theo Williams calling you on this frigid day. This is our second day we've had off. For those of you who are just taking classes online, unfortunately, you don't get a day off because class can still go on as long as the internet is working. But we've been off as far as non-track classes for the last couple of days. We go back tomorrow morning. I want to shoot this video over form number 2 just to chime in to discuss some of your responses and my response to those responses. So just get right into this. One of you said that studying the past, the question was, how important was it from a intercultural communication standpoint? Was it to know anthropology and history and sociology and psychology and all those other disciplines? I think the first thing that's important to establish is one of the things I think that's unique about communication, and I think it's something that's special about communication, is a lot of terminology, a lot of the theories, a lot of the background, the disciplines, the models that we use to understand communication. Some of those originated specifically within the field of communication. However, there's a lot of those terminologies, a lot of those theories have been taken from other disciplines, such as psychology, history, anthropology, religion, sociology, philosophy. What's unique and I think effective about that is when you're thinking about a person and you want to break down how to identify that person, how to understand that person, how to ultimately relate to and communicate with that person, we can focus in on one particular aspect of that person's identity. We could just look at their behaviors. We could look at their race and ethnicity. We could look at their upbringing. We could look at their religious views. We could isolate those things and get a partial view of who they are, a partial understanding and perspective of who they are. But it's going to be more effective if we approach them as holistic people, as if we give proper attention to the several identities that make up who they are. And so we don't just look at it from a communication standpoint, but even when we're focusing on communication, we can still take in consideration their cultural background in terms of the family structure they were born into, the location that they lived growing up, any religious beliefs, their gender. We can take in consideration all types of things. And so I think that's what gives communication an advantage as a field, that we are made up of all these disciplines. We're interdisciplinary. So we don't just look at it from one standpoint. We look at the person and we ultimately try to figure out how to communicate with and relate to that person by taking all these other different aspects into consideration. And so as with that being said, we asked, why is that so important? Why shouldn't we just focus in on one particular thing? Why shouldn't we just judge a person by a particular aspect of their cultural identity? And here were some of your thoughts. Someone says studying the past of different cultures through anthropology and history can put us in a position to make strides towards reducing prejudices and working together. And someone else said something very similar to that in terms of our past or our history plays a big role in how we communicate with others. If we tried different things in the past that have failed, we are less likely to try them again today. But if a person that we are working with has no knowledge of this, it's harder for them to understand where we are coming from. So it's vital that we communicate and share our past experiences. Right then, I think that is great. I think it's important even in terms of what I do as a professor, especially in terms of what I do when I talk about racial reconciliation, and even ultimately in terms of what I do as a pastor when I'm thinking about spreading the gospel. I always emphasize that learning the stories of people are important. When I did my dissertation, normally when you're doing research, you're normally going to do quantitative or qualitative. Quantitative focuses on the what, the numbers. Qualitative focuses on the story behind the story, the why, the how. And I'm a qualitative person. I don't want to just look at the product. I want to know about the process. I don't want to just see the numbers. I want to know the stories behind those numbers. And so I believe it's important that as we think about communication, especially across cultural barriers, the more we know about those individuals, the more we know about their background, their upbringing, their hurts, their pains, their likes, their dislikes, where they've been, what they've gone through, it's going to help us in terms of avoiding a lot of preconceived notions, avoiding a lot of stereotypes, avoiding a lot of premature closure, avoiding a lot of miscommunication when we take the time to get to know those individuals for who they are, but not just a portion of who they are, but all of who they are. Someone else said that a lack of understanding that there are different types of intercultural communication, including history, economics, social science, anthropology, and politics, has significant potential for miscommunication and potentially even offensive behaviors that can lead to conflict. Someone says understanding the communication is going to be very important in understanding the people that we work with. Someone says that the history of these things combined can contribute to the bottom of the iceberg for us to help understand where we're coming from. And so think about that iceberg, what we normally see on the top, race, gender, behaviors, we hear someone's language, and then we jump to conclusions. I think about my best friend who happens to be white. His wife is Dominican. She speaks Spanish, so she may be out and about speaking Spanish in the grocery store to their daughter, and someone will make a comment about this. If you're going to be here in America, speak the language or go back where you're from. And they're basically taking what they see on the top of the iceberg, her skin color, the fact that she speaks Spanish, and then they're just running with that. And they're predetermining who she is based upon those one or two attributes. But what we are learning is there's so much more to us below the surface, below the bottom of the iceberg. And the more we understand what's at the bottom of the iceberg, which is the bulk of that person's cultural identity, the more effective communication we can have with that individual. And it's important because more and more in our day-to-day lives, we're going to interact with people who are multicultural, people who are of different cultures than ourselves. And we can't just go by based upon what we saw on TV, what we heard through the grapevine, or we can't go based upon even some of our own experiences if those experiences are isolated. Say you may have met someone from a different culture and you had a poor experience, and then from that poor experience, you attribute it to everyone in that culture. Even that's dangerous. And as someone said, it could lead to potentially offensive communication and even conflict. So I think it's important that we're open to understanding that history plays a role in what we're talking about. So let's break some of those things down. Some people in relationships, especially black-white relationships, even in romantic cross-gender relationships, one notion is, hey, regardless of what has happened in history, let's you and I focus on the present, focus on the future. Let's focus on our relationship, and don't worry about what has happened in the past. That was not us. We weren't around then. We've moved on. Yet you find out in romantic relationships through baggage, through hurts and pains, and even through joys, and you find out through interracial relationships that history and baggage and all those things are real. That there's residual effects that take place. That we can't simply say, let's move on from the past. Now, we can move on from the past, biblically speaking, if we acknowledge it, we repent, and we turn from that. But what we're talking about is sometimes we don't even want to acknowledge that. Or we want to say that was them over there. Let us focus on this. Yet that will oftentimes follow us into this. Even if it wasn't direct, it may indirectly impact us. So we need to know the history. We can't just look at someone and judge their current behaviors. We can't just look at them and judge their current mindsets, their current attitudes, beliefs, and not take in consideration the history of that person, the history of that the people groups that they belong to, and how that has impacted their current viewpoints. We think about economics. That's a big thing, especially in terms of racial reconciliation. I was just I hadn't even read the article yet, but I got someone that linked me to an article about a particular denomination. I think Southern Baptist, possibly some denomination. I'm not sure. Maybe it was a seminary. It was actually I think a Southern Baptist seminary, or some Baptist seminary whose history was very intertwined with race, slavery, and they had recently began to repent from that and acknowledge, although this current generation weren't around then, they said as a group, we need to repent from this. We need to acknowledge this. Yet there was no discussion of economic reparations and how to make those things up. So it's good that you say from this day forth we won't discriminate. It's good to say from this day forth there should be no inequality. But sometimes, since some of that inequality manifested itself in economic structures, and now that there are certain people groups who are economically disadvantaged because of systemic racism, how can we fully turn from that? How can we fully address that issue and not look at the economic side of it? For some people, think about gender equality, and you still have women who make a fraction of what men make. So we could say all day that women are equal, that women can be CEOs and women can be whatever they want to be, but if their paychecks are still smaller compared to their male counterparts, then that could be a legitimate issue that still needs to be addressed. So we need to look at history, but we also need to look at economics. We need to look at the politics behind it. We need to look at systems. We need to look at anthropology, which was often used to justify inequality. There were theories and science that said that certain people groups were inferior biologically and genetically speaking, that has since been debunked. But all those things need to be put on the table in order to fully effectively communicate. We need to look at the role that anthropology, that sociology, that religion has played in who we are. I was just commenting on Facebook that I'm not the man I used to be, and the primary reason why is because of my walk with Christ. But we also need to look at how Christianity and even religion as a whole has often been used to oppress a lot of people also. And so we can't just isolate any particular cultural identity and focus on that. If we want to be effective, we need to be able to look at the integration and the amalgamation of all those factors. Someone says when trying to understand all these things, when it comes to intercultural communication, it cannot be explained only by behavior. That's a big one right there. When we talk about those layers, we talk about those icebergs. We want to just look at the layer. One thing I know my wife used to pride herself on when she was a school teacher, and even now that she still has her own business working with a lot of different people, especially young people, is you can't just look at the behaviors of these young people. They're acting out in class, they're falling asleep in class, and yes, there is a level of responsibilities, personal responsibility. I am a big advocate for personal responsibility, but we also need to look at community cooperation and systemic accountability. We can't just look at their behaviors and say, well, this person's falling asleep in class, they must be lazy. Or this person isn't doing what they must doing, they're disruptive. But we need to know the story behind the story, because maybe they're falling asleep in class because they were up all night, because the father's not around, the mother's working 3 jobs to make ends meet, and this particular young student is caring for his or her younger siblings, didn't get a proper meal, didn't get proper sleep, so now they're falling asleep in school. That may be the case, and maybe they are truly lazy. We don't know if we just look at the tip of the iceberg. We got to look at the whole iceberg, and we need to take time to hear those stories. Someone says a person needs to understand that all these items that we discussed, and how someone came to believe the things that they are able to communicate. That's important, especially when someone believes and communicates in a way that is contrary to what we believe and how we communicate. And we're quick to say that their difference And it's not just that they're different, but that they're wrong and we disagree and we don't want to take the time to really be empathetic or to listen and hear their side. But one of the things that can help us be more empathetic, one of the things that would compel us to actually listen and hear their side, would be able to recognize, hey, and try to better understand, why did they come to believe the thing that they believe? So when I think about ministering to those who have fallen away from the faith, or at least those who no longer are big fans of church or organized religion or whatever, how they, there's different ways of expressing that, but especially if they're not a big fan of attending church, and it's due to some hurt that they say some there was some hypocrisy, a scandal at the church, whatever it may be. I can't simply just quote a whole bunch of scriptures that says, hey, you should become the church, never forsake the fellowship of like-minded believers. I will quote those things, but I also want to be to listen to their story, because maybe there's some legitimate hurt there. Maybe there's some legitimate things that need to be reconciled. There's some need for healing, some forgiveness, some restoration, some repentance on our behalf of the church. And maybe it's not me personally, but the same way Isaiah, I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell among a people with unclean lips. So sometimes we need to be able to repent on behalf of a corporate body. But we won't never do that if we just dismiss the behaviors of a person. We just dismiss the beliefs of a person, that not only are they different, but they're wrong, and we don't give any credence, any validation to those things. And what we end up doing a lot of ways is we invalidate the person. Whether that's our intention or not, that's the way that person is going to receive it. If you continue to reject what I believe, how I feel, and don't give me any opportunity to explain and tell my story, they're going to see that as a personal rejection. So I think it's important that we do so. Someone else said the power to understand how people tick. Being able to communicate effectively can lead to a better world. And someone else said that same thing also, that, understanding what it says, strive to just be better. The world would be a lot better place if we took time to understand people. And I think that's ultimately what it's about. We jump to conclusions, we jump to rash decisions, and we dismiss individuals, especially if it's something that's uncomfortable, something that we fear, something that's unknown, something that we disagree with. And we just chalk it up to, hey, I think I can go through life and not have to deal with this issue. But we're finding more and more as the world is becoming more intercultural, more multicultural, more global, that we're going to be forced to deal with these issues, or you can become irrelevant. You become obsolete. Even future employers, they want employees who are able to connect with a lot of diverse groups of people. And so understanding the role of history and economics and psychology and sociology and anthropology, religion, philosophy, all those things, a better understanding. So we're not talking about being masters of all those disciplines, but having working knowledge that individuals aren't just who we see them as on the surface, that there's more to it. And here's the kicker. We should know that we need to do a better job of understanding those individuals because they're complex. And one of the reasons why we know that to be true is because a lot of individuals don't even know how complex they are. And so if the average individual doesn't realize just how much they're influenced by these different things, these different factors, how can we possibly know that? And so we can't be quick to judge, and hopefully they're not quick to judge us, but that we're both willing to take the time to sit down across the table for one another, to build with one another, to break bread, to ask the right questions, to ask the wrong questions, to make some mistakes, to have some successes together, to have some failures together, to do life together, and then to one day have a better understanding of who we are and be able to better effectively relate to and communicate with one another, because we've taken the time to realize that we are not just one singular thing, that we're not just defined by one particular identity, but that we are multicultural individuals. And the more that we can understand that and give credence to those different cultures and to appreciate the richness of those different cultures, the better we're going to be off. This has been Professor Theo with a breakdown of Form 2. As I mentioned in the announcements, I've been grading your papers. You can expect to start to see some of those grades tomorrow night, which is Friday, as well as Saturday. And I'll shoot a quick video about the papers, just going over them. Also, for those who are taking quiz 2, it was brought to my attention that there was a mistake on one particular answer that was on question 10, I believe. I went in manually, corrected that. Because someone had already taken that quiz, now since I've corrected it, the computer is going to automatically generate a script to anyone who takes that quiz. When you take the quiz, it's going to say, hey, this quiz has been regraded. What it's simply saying is that particular answer has been changed, it's been regraded to make sure that if you get it correct, you'll get counted correctly for it. So the whole quiz isn't being regraded, it's just that one particular question was changed and the answer was changed. But now the computer is just letting everyone know that that's taking place. All right, so continue to work hard, continue to stay inside. I guess we're going to be back out tomorrow. But hopefully be safe if the roads are bad. Continue to use wisdom. Hope you learned a lot from this forum and finish up strong. Take care. God bless.